This episode of Bullet Heaven was made with a copy of the game provided by Zerodiv. Would you believe us if we told you that there are even more shooters available on the Nintendo Switch? Surprising, we know. One of the highest profile publishers when it comes to shooting games on the Switch is Zerodiv, who continues to release new entries in its for Nintendo Switch line of shooting games from Psykyo. This line of shooting games includes titles like Strikers 1945, Gumbarich, and, as we've seen on Bullet Heaven, Gunbird and Zero Gunner 2-.
Their latest release, Samurai Aces for Nintendo Switch, was released on February 15th, 2018. Known as Sengoku Ace in Japan, it was originally released to arcades all the way back in 1993, with a subsequent release on the PS2 as part of a Sengoku Ace compilation that also included its sequel Sengoku Blade. As Psikyo's first game after breaking away from Video System, the creators of Arrow Fighters, how does Samurai Aces work? Let's take a closer look.
The gameplay in Samurai Aces is where Psikyo's typical game structure all began, and it's something we've seen in other Psikyo reviews so far. Players are given a number of different character ships to pilot, each with unique speed, fire patterns, special attacks, and bombers. As would be the case for many games to come, the first few stages are also randomized every time the player starts a game, making for a pretty fresh playthrough every single time. This feature started with Arrow Fighters, but would also carry through to future Arrow Fighters games as well. Unsurprising, as Psikyo split off from Video System.
The control in Samurai Aces is very basic. Players move their ship about the screen in an 8-way manner. The player's primary fire is engaged with the A and Y buttons. The A button fires the main shot rapidly and indefinitely, which is pretty handy in taking out swaths of smaller enemies. The Y button will fire rapidly by tapping it, but if held, will charge a special attack. This special technique is powerful, but can often take an exorbitant amount of time in most cases, making it risky to use.
Every character has access to a bomber attack as well, which is triggered with the X or B buttons. Most of these bomb attacks are delayed though, and while most clear bullets from the screen, each has a limited area of effect for damage. But because they take time to activate and because they typically don't cover the whole screen, they aren't especially useful for the kind of panic situations that Samurai Ace's ridiculous bullet speeds present.
Players can power up their ships through P icon pickups, which will increase the main weapon's power by 1 level. The main weapon's level can be increased to a total of 4, but as we saw in Gunbird, the 4th level is only temporary and will fall back down to 3 after a certain amount of time. Some enemies can also drop additional bombs to add to the player's stock. Enough of these are dropped for players to be fairly liberal with them. But bombs are obviously best used against bosses for a quicker defeat. Of course, dying will revert the stock to basic levels.
It's pretty simple all the way through, but there are issues that we found with the overall gameplay. There is quite a disparity between player movement and bullet speed, making it very easy to get clipped without being able to move out of the way in time. Compounding this is an ever so slightly present input delay that will prevent a lot of players from making snap decision tight bullet dodges at speed. It definitely gets frustrating in later stages when continuing means starting the stage all over again.
But another issue here is the difficulty in general. With Zero Gunner 2, it was perhaps a bit too easy overall compared to the Dreamcast version. In this case, the difficulty just a few stages in barely differs between normal, level 5, and level 1, the embarrassingly named Monkey Mode. Especially on later stages, there is so little variance we wonder why there are even so many difficulty levels to begin with. That said, sticking the game on normal will get most players just as far, so there's that.
All of this can be a problem, as with only a couple of credits to start, comparatively few players will be able to see the end of the game on any level by default. Every issue here, though, is admittedly tiny: slowish movement, fastish bullets, a very long weapon charge time, very slight input delays, and slightly delayed bombs. But it ends up being a perfect storm of minor issues that makes Samurai Aces less great than we had hoped. It's clear that this early game held promise, though. The many more Psykyo games that followed improved on all of these issues in every respect.
Another slight issue that we found was that there is no real indication that a boss is incoming. No background music change, no warning visuals, just a big enemy that, once defeated, is followed by the player exiting the screen. It's minor, and once again, something that has been addressed and rectified in later Psykyo releases.
Thankfully, as with other Zerodiv games, there are some decent meta options that allow for players to give themselves a better chance to at least see the end. Players can give themselves extra lives and, most importantly, credits so they can at least get a better feel for the later stages that require stage restart upon continuing. Various visual, audio, and control options also exist here.
Two-player games can be a bit more forgiving though. If a player needs to continue, they can do so without having to restart later stages as long as the other player is on screen and alive. Two-player games add more replay to the game as well, as the player characters interact with each other differently, depending on who is selected.
Samurai Aces is played over the course of 7 stages with a harder second loop accessed after beating the game on higher difficulties. This decent amount of gameplay is hampered with the game's inherent issues though. It's just not as fun as we had hoped. We really want to like Samurai Aces more because it has a ton of personality and it's a good game at its core. But knowing that there are many more Psykyo games out there that play better on every level, this game will be relegated to software completionists, people like us who want to show and demonstrate where later games originated, and of course Psykyo fans looking to be able to play this uncommon release anytime, whether home or on the go. Like other Psykyo games, Samurai Aces is also very simple when it comes to scoring. There's very little here that would boost the player's score outside of enemy destruction, but at least there's something.
Some ground-based enemies or structures will leave coins behind that can be collected for 200 points apiece. There are quite a few of these strewn about the game, and they can add up to a decent amount if enough are collected.
Players will also receive a 2,000 point bonus when collecting power-ups beyond level 4. While level 4 power is a limited time thing, getting power-ups beyond it is still pretty common and, once again, adds up fairly quickly.
As with Gunbird, Samurai Aces for Nintendo Switch does not wipe the score if the player continues the game. This will invariably lead to an extended 400,000 points if enough continues are used. This can sometimes make the difference between success or failure when attempting to clear the make or break stages later on.
As with other Psikyo releases from Zerodiv, once again, only local leaderboards are present in Samurai Aces. Even more interestingly, no matter the difficulty level, the player's score will be applied to the same leaderboard. This kind of reinforces the idea that Monkey and Hard are closer than players may think in terms of overall difficulty. Samurai Ace's presentation is arguably what gives it the most personality amongst other shooters of its time, but while some elements are really cool, others leave a bit to be desired.
Visually, there is a lot to like about Samurai Aces. The character design, for one, is very strong, as is the mechanical design on the whole. Enemies have a level of detail that really make them pop, with sometimes creepy details and clear sprites that make them highly visible. The backgrounds have some great detail as well, especially the stage with a huge Daruma that follows the player around the screen, and the huge digitized waterfall at the end. A lot of visual elements like explosions and shot impacts are very clearly reused from Aero Fighters though.
The player ships all have excellent detail as well, especially with some attacks flying the piloted craft closer to the screen in a smooth manner. Every ship also morphs in some fashion when charging special attacks, which is really cool to boot. Some bomber attacks seem quite lackluster though. Kunoichi Jane's bomb is one of her least favorite in recent memory. While we're on the topic of design though, it's super weird to see an advanced fighter like the YF-23 being piloted by a wolf or, what? A freaking X-Wing? How is this even allowed?
The sound, on the other hand, leaves a lot to be desired. On one hand, the sound effects are all what you'd expect from a game such as Samurai Aces. Good explosions, decent shot sounds. The voice clips are also mostly good, but some are a little iffy, like Tengai's super loud bellowing and Jane's less than enthusiastic tone. On the whole, though, the effects themselves work.
On the other hand, though, the music in Samurai Aces is weak. There is one early stage in particular that features a BGM track composed of 2 looping bars of music. Another later stage doesn't even have a BGM track. Thankfully, every single later Psykyo soundtrack is much better. But with no real standouts, Samurai Aces OST is unremarkable.
The story in Samurai Aces is also something that was fairly uncommon in 1993. Each character has a small snippet of story between stages, much like a fighting game, and, in the case of two-player games, both characters will interact differently with each other depending who is chosen. This results in over 30 story combinations which, as we said before, can add quite a bit of replay to the game.
Finally, like other Zerodiv releases, Samurai Ace's UI is clean and features great original art of the game's characters on each respective player's side of the screen. The score and number of lives and bombs are all plainly visible at a glance and never gets in the way of the action. Screen options also exist once again for Tate mode at home or on the go. You can even get the Japanese Sengoku Ace title screen by changing the language to Japanese. These options are always a nice touch.
So, how does Samurai Aces for Nintendo Switch stack up? Let's take a look.
Slight input delay and sluggish controls come together to make for a frustrating time when dealing with Samurai Ace's really fast bullets.
The charge attack also takes forever to charge. It's almost not worth doing.
There's no denying that Samurai Aces is hard, but the plethora of really tiny issues really add up, making things harder than they ought to be.
Add to that very little difference between the lower and higher difficulties, and it's pretty clear there are balance issues here.
While the stages in Samurai Aces themselves are fairly short, there are a good amount of them.
There are also many different interactions between Samurai Ace's 6 characters in co-op, leading to many different endings and more replay as a result.
Samurai Aces has fairly decent visuals, but nothing earth-shattering. That waterfall background and giant Daruma are cool though.
The ships are neat too. Koyori's red biplane and Ayan's Shinden-style fighter are cool, but what the heck is up with the YF-23 and X-Wing? What?
Samurai Ace's sound is perhaps the weakest we've heard in any of Psikyo's releases, which comes as no surprise as it's their first title.
This can sometimes be excused, but some of the background music here is downright lazy. The voiceover clips work well though.
Samurai Aces seems very innovative at a glance, but most of the mechanics in this game are taken directly from Aero Fighters, which of course comes as no surprise as nearly the exact same team of programmers worked on both.
Still, Samurai Aces set a new precedent in shooting game design that would be continued for over a decade afterwards and refined, with many standout titles like Strikers 1945, Gunbird, and Zero Gunner.
Samurai Aces for Nintendo Switch is available for only $8, so playing this game is very affordable.
Though the gameplay could have been a little better, there's still merit here, and $8 is a great price point.
We definitely get that this was Psikyo's first attempt at striking out on their own, and Samurai Aces definitely set the stage for a lot of great things to come, even if this particular title comes up a little short. We're sure that this game could be acclimated to, and for those that have the patience to see it through, it offers a decent amount of replay. Samurai Aces for Nintendo Switch gets a 3.25 out of 5. You can get a copy of Samurai Aces for Nintendo Switch on the Nintendo eShop for about $8. Man, I'm glad future games from Psikyo were better than this. Still, it's not terrible for its time.
It was definitely a brutal run, that's for sure.
Well, we'll see how things shaped up with Strikers 1945 too, won't we? It was pretty good on the Saturn.
Hopefully it'll be better than Samurai Aces on the Switch.